So this morning, I will take you through a class that shows or talks about the fundamentals of catheters. Okay. Now, this is important because not just to choose catheter, but whenever you take a catheter, you also take appropriate hardware that matches those catheters. And these are basic fundamentals. So let's start with the class. Now, first of all, when you take a catheter in your hand, take a look at the hub. There are many things that are there upon this hub. For example, when you look at the hub, you get 100 written over here. So what does 100 mean? It means that the length of the catheter is 100 centimeters. Get it? It is 100 centimeters. For example, if I take another catheter, say I take this catheter, the hub says 125. Okay. So what does it mean? The length of this catheter is 125 centimeters. Or for example, if I take another catheter, say for example, a visceral catheter like this one you'll see has got a length of 80 centimeters written. Now, why is this important? Now, suppose you are going to take a patient and you feel you want to use a long sheath. On an 80 centimeter catheter, you cannot use even a 70 centimeter sheath. The problem is you'll have only 10 centimeters outside, and sometimes that becomes challenging. Worse still, if on an 80 centimeter catheter, you go and put a 90 centimeters or a 100 centimeter sheath, the catheter won't exit out, right? You understand? And this challenge can be very common. For example, when you're working in the carotid, you take a catheter like this, like a vertebral catheter, and you're trying to hook the vertebral artery. At the same time, you're taking a long sheath, which is 100 centimeter, and the catheter won't exit. So there you'll need a catheter, which is longer, which is like the 125 cm multi-purpose catheter we showed you here. But what you have is today you got all catheters in different lengths. For example, you can have a vertebral catheter in 125. You can get a catheter which is used for even transradial, which are all 125. So the first marker that you need to understand is the marker which tells you the length. Okay. The second thing you have to see is there is, sorry, this was upside down. You got to see that the 125 written. Now there is a 038 written. So what does 038 mean? It takes a 038 guide wire. It's important because this tells you the guide wire compatibility of any catheter. So this is 038. This is also 038. And we have another catheter here. This is also 038. Now this 038 also is not just for guide wires. It makes us understand that you can take a micro catheter as much as 0.025 inch micro catheter, like what you use a pro grade. All of them can go into a catheter that takes a 038. Extremely important. So remember this fact that you have to look at these. I'm just trying to see if there's any catheter today. This is also very hard to see, I know, but all these are 038. So you cannot get a diagnostic catheter which actually is less than 038 because that's how it is. Okay. Now that you finished that, let us look at another big number here. This says 4. What does that mean? It says that it is a 4 French catheter, right? For example, here we got another catheter for Merit, and this says 5. Can you see that? So to understand this, there are lots of information in the hub. The same kind of information they printed in a balloon catheter, they printed in a micro catheter. So this is a 5 French. Obviously, it means you need a 5 French sheath for this. And the last thing that you look at is 1200. What is that? 1200 is the burst pressure of the catheter, or the pressure at which you can inject contrast through an injector. It is 1200 psi, pounds per square inch. You understand that very well? It's important that you understand these fundamentals. So if you are in doubt, once you're used to a catheter, you don't have to look. But otherwise, when in doubt, look at a catheter. And like I said, it has got lots of information at the hub of the catheter, right? You got it? A lot of information at the hub of the catheter. So there are many ways in which catheters are created. For example, this catheter that we see over here is braided. So if you cut this catheter, you'll find you can't cut it easily. Now, why is braided important? The braiding is made of stainless steel. It is made so that you cannot break these catheters. Can you see? Whatever you do see, you cannot break it. Now, this is a very important thing because some catheters will break. Some catheters will break, and that's why it is very, very dangerous. For example, this catheter, can you look at this black component of this catheter? This doesn't have braiding. So what will happen? I can easily break it apart. And I'll break it apart towards the end of the class after I talk about the shape, just to make you understand that these catheters can be easily broken. Whereas if you look at any of these catheters, however hard you pull it, whatever you do, they don't break. So even if they twist and they tangle and they get knotted, they don't break, which is a very, very important factor. Why is it important? Because basically, when you're doing a case, you can retrieve these catheters if you're smart. Having said that, I'll just quickly tell you how to retrieve a catheter. Not really part of the class, but since I told you this, I'll just make you understand what happens. So for example, you're working with a catheter, and this technically is a multi-purpose catheter. Can you got the curve? It's a multi-purpose catheter, is just a name. In honest reality, we don't use these catheters often. Now, also in a catheter, it's very important to see the tip. These catheters, if we can zoom closer, you will notice has got just one hole at the tip. Okay, just one hole at the tip, right? Whereas there are some catheters when you got two holes also on the side. Typically, these two holes are given that if you engage the ostium, you can see in the main vessel as well as the side. Now, it's important only for one reason. If you want to inject particles for embolization, never take a catheter with side holes because particles will escape from the side holes. You got this point? It always has to be a single hole catheter which comes out from the tip. It's a fundamental. Never forget that. For example, typically a pigtail catheter is a catheter that actually will have multiple side holes. See, for example, this is a pigtail catheter. If you look at this catheter very carefully, you'll see there are holes on the side here, and there is a tip hole. So even if you can get this tip into a selective vessel, you still don't inject because the danger of particles escaping out. Have we got this? Also, you don't use these kind of catheters of pushing out coils. Sometimes some part of the fibers will get knotted inside it, right? So this is another concept or understanding that catheters can have a single tip or multiple tip. I was just telling you that if you get into trouble, how do you come out? For example, this is a multi-purpose catheter. Unknowingly or knowingly, you enter into a vessel, and without any knowledge, you're togging this vessel. Now, what happens? This catheter gets knotted, right? It becomes knotted like this, and now you are in a very, very awkward position. Imagine you're across the aortic bifurcation. Your catheter is down here. You have not realized you are togging it for some reason, and this whole thing will finally get knotted and knotted. So understand one very important thing: never push the catheter out. If you push the catheter out, as you try to unknot it, the whole catheter will rotate. Have you got it? You will understand. So you have to fix the tip. So if you see a knotting taking place, make sure one end of the catheter is in a vessel, say the opposite iliac. Then when you rotate, this tip doesn't rotate and you can rotate it out. Have you got this? Or you can enter into the renal artery or somewhere. So one of the key crucial things of unknotting a catheter is to actually get the tip fixed somewhere. Try to pull it down, get into a renal artery or get into a branch. Then start slowly, carefully under multiple mags. Keep looking till the catheter unfolds itself, and then you can pull it out. But this is only possible with a braided catheter. All the other catheters will break. I'll come to that, okay? So let's start with a common catheter we use. This is a pigtail catheter. But this is an interesting pigtail catheter because it's got metal markers. Okay? These metal markers are set 1 centimeter apart. So it is a pigtail catheter, but also it is a catheter that can be used for measuring. So where would you like to measure? Typically, you will measure this in an aneurysm. For example, you are going to treat an infrarenal aortic aneurysm. You want to know what is the exact length of the graft you like to do or use. We already know that on CT, but we have to reconfirm all these. So now with this pigtail inside, you can easily measure the length from the renal artery to the aortic bifurcation or to the iliac bifurcation, because each marker is 1 centimeter apart. So this is called a marker pigtail. It's almost like having a scale inside the body. Magnification is totally corrected. It's very, very important. So this is a pigtail catheter, but when you have these marks, we call it as a marker pigtail catheter. Pigtail catheters can be also come in a little angle. So it will be called, it look like this, and then we'll call it an angle pigtail catheter. Where do you use an angle pigtail catheter? For doing pulmonary angiograms. Because what happens is, because of the angle, when you go from the IVC, it easily enters the right atrium, and then when you turn it around, it looks up and you go up. Have you got that idea? So this is called an angle pigtail catheter, and a regular pigtail catheter, a marker pigtail catheter, and sometimes you can have a curve which is much, much tighter, which can give you a small pigtail at the tip. Now, you may ask, why do you need a small pigtail? It's very useful in just one procedure. If you want to puncture the femoral artery absolutely in the center, then you'll ask, why should I puncture exactly in the center? Typically, this puncturing in the center is used when you want to do a total percutaneous procedure where a large sheath is used. So where do you use a large sheath? Not in neurointervention, but for aortic stent grafts. So there, you take this catheter, the small pigtail, and you place it within the common femoral artery and puncture in the center of the eye of the pigtail. So now you know you're bang in the center, the catheter is totally profiled, and for getting that, a small pigtail works better, because typically a CFA is about 6 millimeters, right? Got that thing? So there are very interesting uses of catheters, and so the pigtail catheter is a catheter that can be used primarily for flush aortograms in the aortic arch, in the infrarenal abdominal aorta, in the thoracic aorta, wherever you want a flush aortogram. Other than that, do you have any other use of a pigtail catheter? Yeah, we can use it sometimes to cross a very tough aortic bifurcation. So you take a wire. Let's just show that what exactly happens. Let me just prepare this catheter for you for a minute. We'll just use some flush. If it is there, just give me a little bit of a flush and a syringe. Okay, we just flush it, and I'll show you exactly what happens to the pigtail when you take a wire like a thermo wire. Okay. So we're gonna just take this wire, and we put a wire like a thermo wire into it, and we will see what exactly happens. Just a sec. We'll wet the wire. We just want to wet the wire. As you know, these soft wires will never cross unless they are, the coated wires will never cross unless they are very, very wet and lubricated, right? So this one basically has got a hydrophilic coating, and I'm getting this wire. 1 minute. In a minute, I'll show you exactly what happens. So you see, can you see this? Though the wire is coming out, the shape is retained, right? Now, for example, if you bring this across the bifurcation, it actually takes almost a tight angle like this, and you can actually try to cross it. Even more useful than that, see, look at that, it just opens at this point. Now, even more useful than that is when you come transradial or transbrachial, and we want to enter the descending aorta. It gives you a very, very good angle. For example, I'm coming from the arm. I want to enter, typically when you come from the arm, the catheter will go straight into the ascending aorta. Okay, it will go straight down the ascending aorta. Now you want to make it go into the descending aorta. So pull this back so that it's at the origin of the innominate artery. Now see what happens. Just imagine you're right here, just at the origin. This catheter is just kind of unfolding, and as you push it forward, you will find that it actually becomes like this, right? Have you got it? Now imagine now if you rotate it round in this position, you will actually be able to, now this is how you're keeping your catheter. It is opening, it is goes and it flips into the descending out. Have you got the shape, right? So this is another very, very useful technique we use in a difficult unfolded outer. If you want to come from the arm and enter the descending outer, you push this out and you come. So remember, keep this always in hand. It's very, very helpful, right? So what are the uses of the pigtail catheter? Like we said, for flush autograms, whichever part you want. It can also be used to do a crossover in a tight outer where you want to enter the opposite iliac artery. Can also be used to come from the arm into the descending outer as where you can use a soft wire and manipulate it and get across. Also, we have said that these have got interesting uses. It has got these markers which allows you to measure and you can know the absolute length from the renal artery to the aortic bifurcation or from the bifurcation to the iliac bifurcation, from the internal and external. So remember, whenever you want to measure, you have got this choice. Have you got it? Right. Let's now come to some other common catheters we use. A very common catheter that we use in our department is a catheter called the Bernstein catheter, right? Now, this is nothing but a simple right angle that has been given to the catheter. Just sorry, that was the Judkins. Now look at this. I wanted to see, it looks almost like the Judkins, but the Judkins has got a secondary curve, okay? Whereas the Bernstein does not have it. So you can use one for the other, but sometimes we find the Bernstein works very, very well as a very good multi-purpose catheter. The word Bernstein catheter also very closely resembles the vertebral catheter. Now, where can you use the Bernstein? One, very often in a not so complicated aortic bifurcation, you can use it to cross into the opposite or the bifurcation just by placing it this way. Okay, and then you take the wire out and it goes down. Okay. You can use it then to come down, enter the profunda or the common femoral artery, right? You can enter into the tibial vessels, into the ATA, the PTA, the peroneal trunk. You can come into the arch. You can easily enter into the right. If the arch is not unfolded or it is not a type C arch, in an A and a B, you can enter the subclavian as well as the left carotid. So we use it a lot. The vertebral arteries and catheter is another very, very good replacement for this. And the other catheter, of course, I said is a Judkins catheter, which especially when it is JR4, when it is for a large arch, you'll find that this also works, right? So, got it? These always come in 100 centimeters, but there are catheters like vertebral arteries, which can also come in 125 centimeters. So this is a Bernstein, very, very similar to the Judkins, right? Except that it's got a secondary curve. Another catheter that again closely resembles the Judkins right. Let me just take the Judkins right for you. So this is the Judkins right. Now this catheter often can be confused with the Cobra catheter with a double curve renal. So I'll show them all together. So the first thing, remember, the double curve renal catheter usually comes in a length that is much shorter. Usually it will be 80, but you look at the curve. Almost the same, but has got a small difference. And what is the difference? Just have a look at these two catheters. Okay, let's just see this. Now, can you see this one? It has got a very prominent secondary curve, a longer tip, and a tighter curve. So it's very useful to get into renal arteries. What exactly happens is this outer convexity will actually touch the wall of the outer, and it kind of pushes this tip to go into the renal artery. Okay, have you got it? It will go inside this way. So it's a good catheter, but one of the challenges with these catheters are when you inject very hard, it will pop out, So sometimes you'll get out of the ostium, but it's a common catheter that you can use and can be used for renal arteries. Now, the other catheter here is the Cobra, right? Now look at this. This also is very similar to the double curve renal, except that the secondary curve is more gradual. And depending on the size of the distance from the tip to the secondary curve, you will call it as a Cobra 1, Cobra 2, or a Cobra 3. So what does the secondary curve do? It pushes the catheter onto the opposite wall of the outer. Okay, I want you to understand this concept of this. So what does it do? Technically, what it does is, if you have the outer here, it pushes, right? So if the outer is dilated, you will use a bigger curve. Have you got this idea? You're going to use a bigger and a bigger curve. So you will use a Cobra 2 or a Cobra 3 if it's a very dilated outer. It's a normal narrow outer, you can use a Cobra. So these are visceral catheters, works just like the renal, double curve renal. This can be used to enter the renals, can be used to enter the superior mesenteric artery, it can be used to enter the inferior mesenteric and the celiac. But the problem is it's difficult to track them beyond it. So it's good for osteal injections, and we'll show how you can go selective with certain catheters. Okay, so this is a Cobra, and I also showed you the Judkins right to make you understand about the secondary curve that is there. So the Judkins right, as you know, was ideally created to enter the right coronary artery. Okay, you come down like this and you go into the arch and you rotate it this way, it will hook. But this also works pretty good as a visceral catheter and can be used very, very often. But probably one of the catheters we use very, very often, at least in our department, is a catheter called the Simmons catheter. The Simmons catheter again is 1, 2, and 3, depending on the secondary curve and the length. Now have a look at this. We'll just open this for you to see better. Okay, now have a look at this. Can you see this? Now this curve, so what does this curve do? It is very useful, especially when you are in the arch of the outer and you want to enter vessels in a person whose outer is totally dilated, like we call the type C outer. So imagine what happens in real life. You enter, and when you enter the body, this catheter will look straight up, right? You have to first of all make the curve. So where do you make the curve? One of the places, you just push the catheter. If it by some chance enters a renal artery or any artery and you push it up, it forms a curve. Otherwise, typically, just go into the arch of the outer, and when you come into the ascending outer, it will automatically form a curve against the valve, and then you bring it out. Now, when you come out, remember that this is the arch, and as you pull it, it will enter first into the innominate artery. Push it down, rotate it out, pull it a little, and then pull it. It will enter into the left carotid artery. Then push it out, rotate it a bit, and you can enter into the subclavian artery. Have you got this? Okay, so understand that. So this is how we do. We go in, we hook the ostium and we pull it. And as we pull it, it will straighten up and enter this vessel. Then after that, you can cannulate the vessel. It's difficult to track these catheters because of the tight angle. Now imagine if you're using this in a very unfolded outer, you need this catheter, right? Why does it happen? Because the innominate artery is very, very low. It's at almost at this position in the arch. And now from this position, when you pull it up, you engage it and you open it up, right? Then you pull it out, rotate it out, pull it a little, make it straight, and you engage the left carotid artery. I hope you understand. So remember that for all people who are doing neuro work, you need to have the Simmons, because without this, you cannot engage carotids in an unfolded outer. So remember, making a curve in a Sim 2 or a Simmons 2 is more difficult. You go right into the aortic valve and you push the catheter, it will come like this. As the tip touches the valve and you push it, it will go like this, and you push it down. And now you got to straighten this catheter sometimes and use a J wire to open this up. And then you enter that, right? Like I said, it's difficult to go distal. Sometimes you can, but typically what we would do is we would take this catheter, engage the vessel, take a roadmap, take an exchange wire, go into the external carotid artery, and then take a simpler catheter to change it. But once in a way, if the catheter, the wire gets a very good purchase, you may be able to straighten this catheter and push it, but it's not always possible. So this is a Sim 1, Sim 2, and Sim 3. But you may ask, is that the only use? No, there are several more uses. Because of this curve, you can enter intercostal arteries easily. So it's a very good catheter for bronchial arteries, for intercostal arteries. Then coming down, you can enter the celiac axis. You can elect the Simmons, you can enter the superior mesenteric artery, you can enter the inferior mesenteric artery, you can enter the renal artery, and you come down, you can enter the aortic bifurcation. Got it? So sometimes we use this just to recanalize an occluded vessel. And I'll also tell you a thing, you can mutilate this catheter sometimes to make it useful. For example, you have a patient where you want to do a crossover and try to open an occluded vessel, then you can take a knife or a scissor and snip it. So now what happened, the tip gets like this shape, can you get it? So it's a little more easier. Sometimes it almost becomes like a catheter, which we call the shepherd screw catheter. I don't know if you have a shepherd screw. We have it, we'll show it to you. Otherwise, just forget it. It looks just like this, and it's a shorter catheter. Okay, so it's a single tip catheter, can be used for embolization. You can inject particles through that. You can enter the renal artery. You can use gel foam, PVA. You can enter bronchial arteries and use it for embolization of the bronchial vessels. So get it, there are a lot of possibilities with catheter. One of the most useful catheters to have. So if you're just having 3 catheters, you need a pigtail, a Bernstein or a vertebral, and a Simmons 1 and a Simmons 2. Okay, many of the other catheters are hardly used by us. Then I'll show you some exotic catheters. For example, look at this. This is almost an exotic looking catheter. And this is called the Yashiro catheter. It's got a curve which is like a 3-dimensional curve. So why do we use it? We use it to enter the hepatic artery. And because of its very soft nature, this is basically a glide cath from Thermo. You can easily enter the celiac axis. Then you can enter the hepatic and you can track this catheter all the way. And it's very good when you're doing selective injections of the hepatic, when you want to do a TACE, you want to do a tear, you want to enter the gastroduodenal artery. Also, it's a good catheter to enter the left gastric. See, when it enters and when you pull this catheter straight, it has a tendency to look up. So when it looks up, it will look straight up into the left gastric. You can enter. So it's a very good catheter, especially for SMA and its branches. Other than that, you can use it even for the IMA, but technically speaking, it's a great catheter and it's a specialty catheter. Good to have it in the lab if you do a lot of work in the hepatic vessels and the splenic, and or especially for TACE and tear, where this one catheter can actually help you in many, many ways. Another specialty catheter is called the Ann Roberts catheter, or the Roberts uterine artery catheter. So remember, when you open this catheter up, it looks just like a Bernstein. Have you seen that? The curve is just like a Bernstein catheter. So you can enter the opposite side by just using this catheter. Okay, you just target, you enter. Once you enter, take your wire down and take this catheter into the opposite side. Once you come to the opposite side, at this point, there's actually a radiopaque marker, and you will see it. And at this point, you just push this catheter up and it forms the curve. So technically, it will look like this in the bifurcation. As you push it up, the whole loop goes up and you have created this curve. Once this curve is created, you pull it down, you can enter into the internal iliac, you can enter the uterine artery, you can enter into the anterior division, whatever. But as you target, it will move. But remember, the direction is opposite. Whenever you push, the catheter goes up. Whenever you pull, the catheter comes down. Also remember, you can easily knot this catheter. So you can understand, as you target, it gets knotted. And the most dangerous part of this catheter is not just the knotting. The problem is this catheter can break when you knot. So be careful. See, look at this catheter tip. Keep looking. Can you see that? It's broken into 2 pieces. It is as flimsy as this. I want you to remember this extremely important point, that this catheter can break, and once it's break, it's a disaster. It's difficult to take out this piece. Just have a look. These tip pieces are so flimsy, you can break it just with this much pressure. So remember, when you're knotting it around, it's a disaster. You'll knot it, you'll break it. See, can you get this? It gets knotted. You try to open this, it doesn't open. You end up breaking this into bits and pieces like this. Can you see that? It's an absolute disaster. It's very, very challenging to take these bits out. So when you're working with these ultra soft tip catheters, always make sure you don't knot it. Always make sure you do not knot it, right? So most of the uterine artery catheters are like this. They also at one time had created Simmons catheters for cerebral use like this. Never ever use it. In the internal iliac, breaking a catheter will not cause much harm. In the brain, you'll have a stroke. It's a disaster. Never ever use a soft tip catheter with a breakable tip for any cerebral work. Have you got it? For example, now if you're working with a Simmons 1 or a 2, you can't break it. I mean, you cannot do whatever you want, you can't break it. Have you got it? It's impossible. You twist it, you turn it, you do anything in the world, it's not going to break because they are braided, they got steel wires inside it, which is not there in those catheters. This is a fundamental, never ever forget it, so that you can never ever ever get into trouble, right? So these are some catheter shapes. There are lots more shapes. Another very interesting shape is the Judkins left catheter. Do we have one of those here? I'll just show it to you if possible. So the advantage of the Judkins left, though it is made or created for the left coronary artery, when you take it in the aorta, it produces tremendous pressure on the aortic wall. So sometimes you have an anteriorly located bronchial artery. This may be the only catheter that will fall into it purely because of what? Purely because of the counter force, right? So sometimes in a difficult vessel, you're not able to enter, you may actually make that happen. Remember also, vessels which are sometimes difficult to enter from the leg may be easy to enter from the arm because the direction is absolutely opposite. So I would like to show you some more catheters like we have got a catheter which we use from transradially. Now, basically, this is the transradial visceral catheter, right? Can you see the shape? You come from the arm. It's a very good catheter to enter into the visceral vessels. But if you want to do a transradial cerebral angio, again, this is the catheter used. Which catheter? The SIM2. The SIM2 allows you to come transradially. You go into the ascending aorta, you make the curve, you come from the arm, and you enter each vessel individually. Remember, the choice of catheter for transradial cerebral angiography is SIM2, not SIM1. And just to make you understand this, this is SIM2 and not SIM1. But when you're coming transradial to do visceral work, this is the catheter that you use. This basically is a catheter made by Terumo. It's probably one of the best catheters. Merit is another company that makes it. The important thing over here, if you look at the length, it is 125 centimeters. It's actually 135 centimeters, and it takes a wire. Okay, have you got it? Sorry, it takes a 3/8 wire, so even you can take a micro catheter over it. Got it? So this basically is the transradial catheter that we use for visceral angiography, and SIM1 is the best transradial catheter for cerebral angiography. Okay, so I'm going to show you a catheter which I wanted to show right in the beginning, which is called the shepherd's crook. This is what I told you, that you can cut a SIM1, make it almost like a shepherd's crook, even better than a shepherd's crook when you want to do it. These catheters are hardly ever used, created primarily to inject into the SMA, IMA, celiac axis, but once in a way, we might just use it coming from the brachial artery, want to also enter into, for example, a difficult uh, IMA, internal mammary artery, stuff like that. Theoretically, it's made for the visceral because of the length, just remember that. But what I wanted to show you today is also another catheter we don't typically use in the body except for coronary arteries, but it has use. Now, this is a catheter which I'm talking. This is the Judkins left catheter, okay? Now, just imagine what happened when the Judkins left is opened. It is going to stand out like this. Just imagine the kind of counter pressure it is putting on the aorta. So you have a very difficult vessel which is in the anterior part of the aorta, and you want to do a bronchial artery, it almost falls into it because of the counter force. So we found it very interesting. Sometimes you'll have an ectopic bronchial artery coming from the inferior margin of the aorta at the arch. Again, this is the only catheter that will work. Will nothing else will go because of this very tight loop. So be imaginative when you have a difficult situation. Look at the catheters that you have, and sometimes you can use a catheter which has not been generally described for this, just by understanding the dynamics of a catheter's creation. Have you got it like this, and you got this curve typically meant to enter the left coronary like this very easily, but you can use it in some locations. I've also used it in a very difficult aortic bifurcation when I want to cross to the opposite side, just bringing it down, and you can enter that and use it. So remember, if you want this tight curve, or for example, you want to enter the renal artery, want to do an embolization in a lower pole vessel in an odd angle, this might just do the trick. Have you got it? So you can actually use your imagination, move back and forth. So we are taking you to some basic fundamentals of catheters. We have told you about some basic shapes of catheters, and then I told you how it can be done. This is also an interesting shape. It looks almost like a Bernstein, but it's got a tighter curve. See, it is called the internal mammary artery catheter. But remember, you can use it very well to cross the bifurcation. You can also enter into some other vessel where you need a tight angle, but definitely it's a very good catheter to enter the internal mammary artery. So, I just want to make you understand, guide wires that are used with catheters come in different lengths. So I'll use a typical guide wire. It will be 150 centimeters long. Now, for example, this is a typical wire. And if you can get a new cover, it's much easier to understand. So because everything is written on the cover, but typically these catheter wires are how much? 150 centimeters, giving you that 50 centimeters of extra length. But when you want to do an exchange maneuver, you have to use exactly double the length, because that portion of the wire has to stay inside the body, as to say inside the body. When I take out the catheter, then I take the catheter across. So let me show you the covers to show you what are the typical lengths and how they are written. Remember that it's important to remember this fundamental. My guide wire has to be at least 50 cm longer than the catheter. See, have a look at this cover. Can you see the length that is written over here? 150 centimeters. Okay, I'll get you some more covers just to make you understand the length of different catheters. So this can be comfortably used in a catheter which is 80 centimeters and 100 centimeters. At 125 centimeter catheter, you have just 20 cm left out and can be difficult. Now look at this. This is 260 centimeters. 260 centimeters means you got 60 centimeters of extra length when you do an exchange. So you got a catheter inside the body. The length of the catheter is 100 centimeters. You pull out the catheter. Now you're going to take another catheter, and that has going to take 100 centimeters of length. So you need that extra length to work, because inside the body, 70 to 80 centimeters is going to be inside the body itself. Have you got it? So remember, when you want to do an exchange, you need a catheter 50 centimeters more than double the length of the catheter. So if you're using a 100 centimeter catheter, you need minimum of 250. Here they're given 260. Just remember that. So the two lengths that come is a typical length of 150. We don't get shorter wires except for the access in a sheath. But otherwise, if you want to stock your lab, 150 centimeter catheter and 260 or 280 centimeter catheters depending on the length, right? So imagine if you're using a micro catheter where the length is 150, what should be the length of the guide wire? 300 centimeters. Have you got that? So basically we work on that. We like to have extra length which is more than double the length of the catheter, right? Most of the micros may be in 150 or 125. They're 125 or 280 is perfectly okay, and that's how we work, right? So I hope that you understand some basic fundamentals about catheters. So summarize again, look at the hub of the catheter. Hub will tell you the length, will tell you the size of the guide wire, will tell you the PSI, the pressure that is involved, and that gives you a very, very good idea about what can go through the catheter. Look whether the catheter has got an ultra soft tip. Then remember, it is a breakable catheter, and then it is very, very dangerous. It can break inside the body. Try to avoid it, and if you use it, be careful you don't produce a kink. If you produce a kink, braided or non-braided, make sure the tip is fixed in a vessel as you unfold this catheter, right? After that, look at the tip to see it's a single tip or it's got multiple side holes. If it has got multiple side holes, it's good for angiography, but not good for embolization, not good for passing or pushing a coil across it. Then look at the shapes of the catheter. Secondary curves are given to give you support to push the tip into a vessel. Typically, catheters with a secondary shape is the Judkins right, the Judkins left, the Cobra, the double curve renal. Remember, one of the most versatile catheters for visceral angiography and for entering the carotid artery, the SIM1 and the SIM2. The SIM2 can be used to enter almost any branch of the human body, including the cerebral vessels when you come from the arm. Also remember that SIM 1 is used when the aorta is not very unfolded, and SIM 2 is used when it's a type C arch where cannulating can technically be very, very challenging, right? We have the pigtail catheter, which also could be a marker pigtail. We use it like a scale. But more than that, remember the pigtail is not just for flush, but it's very useful to enter the descending thoracic aorta when you come from the arm and to cross and go to the opposite iliac artery when you go from the leg, right? So we got a general idea about catheters, and I hope that it is useful for you. And now we will keep updating you with more materials. And last but not the least, remember the hardware is to go. Your sheath has to be 10 centimeters short of the catheter, and your guide wires have to be 50 centimeters longer than the catheter. And if you're doing an exchange maneuver, it is double the length of the catheter plus 50 centimeters. Thank you. Good morning.